Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about um, the stage of development of early adulthood. Last time we talked about emerging adulthood, which was this new stage inserted between adolescence, um, which goes from 13 to 18, and then emerging adulthood, which goes from 19 through 25 as a way to bridge this time between adolescence and early adulthood, which is such a complex area for the formation of personal identity. So now we're going to be entering early adulthood. And so we're going to start that at 26. And there are, of course, two options. One would be to just shave emerging adulthood off of early adulthood. And so early adulthood would be shorter. It would go from 26 to 40, and then we would keep middle adulthood at 40 to 60, late adulthood 60 to 80, etc. The other way would be to keep the 20 years duration for all the stages of adult development, and then just have early adulthood, instead of starting at 20, started at 25, 26, and go to 45, and then middle adulthood 45 to 65, and then late adulthood from 65 to 85, etc. All right. So those are two ways to go. This is something that's not been decided upon, so we really can't have can't give you a firm idea of exactly the parameters for early adulthood, but you see the option. Certainly, it starts in early mid 20s, and certainly goes to 40, if not a little bit longer. Anyway, within this stage, I'm going to focus on a very, very important decision, which is a decision of whether or not to have children. And so we could call this lecture "To Have or Not to Have." You remember Shakespeare said the to be or not to be, to exist or not, was the question. But we're going to reformulate Shakespeare and say to have or not to have, i.e. children, is the question that we're going to consider. So for a minute, I'd like you to think about that question and think about whether or not in your life plan, when you envision your life, that you plan to have children, definitely, or whether you plan not to have children, or whether you're not sure. I wonder if we were doing a collective synchronous Zoom class, how many people would say that they were going to have children, and how many would say they weren't, definitely, and how many were unsure about it. So I can tell you that for most people, when you ask them, I'm just changing my notes here, when you ask them, they will say that having at least one child, maybe more, is in their life plan, that they envision that. I would say probably around, historically, it's been about 95%. Now I think things have gone down a little bit, maybe 90%. When I talk to some young people about this decision, the ones who say they definitely don't want kids, you hear some really interesting answers. They say, look, the economy is just so difficult right now. I can barely keep my own head above water. I don't think that I can really support a child the way I would want to. Some people feel they have, beyond finances, they just have a lot of personal issues that they're struggling with, and they don't think that they're They might be a good parent or not ready to be a parent, at least at this point. So another one could be that there's a lot of uncertainty in the world in terms of the climate emergency. We really don't know how things are going to go with this. If some of the forecasts about how the world will be if the climate continues to heat up are correct, which I have no reason to believe they're not, and we can't summon a level of global cooperation needed to combat or mitigate these effects, this could be quite a world to bring a child into. And some people want to hold off and make sure that the world is a place that they would want to bring a child into. So there are a lot of reasons why in this day and age, the number of people who have decided not to have children is slightly increasing. But at the same time, even with those considerations, the vast majority of people decide to have children. Oh, I should mention one other group of people who decide not to have children, and that is people, individuals. This is just anecdotal from my experience. There's no research on this, but it's just something I found that sometimes people who have been an older sibling in a somewhat large family and have had parental responsibilities with respect to their younger siblings, they say that they don't want to have children. It's because for them, they've had experience in the process of being in a quasi-parental role, and they've decided that they don't really want to do that. Which brings up a principle, which is that the only thing as powerful as the drive to have children is the experience of actually having children. And because the experience of having children comes after having had them, then for most people, they wouldn't be inhibited by the reality of the experience. They would only be operating by what they believe, it to be. All right. So those are various reasons that people might choose not to have children or not be sure. But again, the vast majority will say that that's part of their life plan. And that makes sense because we could call having children a decision, but really the forces that are conspiring together to lead people to have children are so powerful that it almost goes beyond a decision for most people. Think about it. First of all, biology. We are animals. We are part of the animal kingdom. And as animals, we have powerful forces to reproduce. And so biology is just compelling us, to reproduce. Beyond the biology and the hormonal forces, there's a lot of social pressure that certainly our own parents, our siblings, grandparents, they all would subtly want to have a child. That's not every family, but in many families, they do want, the line of the family to continue. And there may be some social pressures that you get from your family or friends or the society in general. So there's biological, hormonal factors, there are social, familial factors, and then there are what I might call existential factors. And that's because what children do is they form a family, of course. And a family, despite its imperfections, and despite sometimes it might drive your family members might drive you crazy, that the family is still the best and most powerful hedge we have against the greatest fear of a human being, which is to be alone, helpless, and meaningless in an infinite universe. Now, some people can shelter themselves from those feelings through philosophy or theological position, some faith in something greater. But for many people on a psychological level, the thing that makes people feel less alone, less insignificant, less purposeless, is to belong to something that's manageable and understandable, like a family. So, so you can see those are fairly powerful forces: biology, hormones, family, society, social pressures, and deep existential fears of insignificance and aloneness that are somewhat ameliorated by the belonging and sense of identity and purpose that a family brings. All right. Now, so these are the reasons that people make the initial decision to have a child or children. But now let's look at what people who have actually had children think about the experience after they have participated in it for a really long time. In particular, what we hear is that there are both benefits, significant benefits, and significant costs of having children. We like to think of life being something where there are things that are homogeneously good and pleasurable, and things that are bad and homogeneously awful. But in terms of the things that are homogeneously good, those are very rare. The fact is that everything significant in development has a duality, has good things and bad things about them, have benefits and have costs. And that's the case with having children as well. So there's a whole group of studies that have been done that are called collectively retrospective studies of parental satisfaction. What this big term means is that there are studies that have asked parents who have raised their children to adulthood, that when they look back on the experience of being a parent, are they satisfied with that experience? Are they dissatisfied? Or are they not really sure if they're satisfied or dissatisfied? So they ask that question to the parents. Just be like parents, like your parents, because while you're not in early adulthood yet, you're getting there. So their offspring, especially if you're the youngest in the family, are reaching that time when they would look back on their career raising a child to independence. Anyway, if you ask these parents to look back, these are the ultimate authority of the satisfactions or dissatisfactions. and you ask that question, what you find is that about 75% of parents who raise their children to adulthood say that on balance, they were satisfied with the experience. And about 25% said they were either dissatisfied or they weren't really sure. Now, I wonder, is that shockingly high to you? Did you think the number of people who would be satisfied on balance would be higher? Or was it shockingly low, like you expected people to be in the 90s or something like that? Well, actually, what I would say to you is that remember, this is a self-report study, right? That is, we're asking parents to publicly report, or at least on a piece of paper, to report whether they were satisfied or not. And so it's a self-report measure, so it's going to evoke social desirability considerations, which we talked about in the Baumrind study. And that means that some percentage of these parents would give a socially desirable effect, which may not fully represent their own experience. So I would have to say to you that 75% is probably higher than the true index of parents who are really quite satisfied with their experience. How much elevated that number is because of the social desirability effect, we don't know. It could be very close to 75. It could be meaningfully lower. But anyway, that's the number we have. That's the number we report, although it's probably somewhat inflated. And that's kind of shocking, to people. Anyway, when you ask the people who were overall satisfied, and they've done this in these studies, they've given them a long list of potential reasons that they were satisfied. And they asked people to check the ones that apply and ignore the ones that don't. And one thing that's been incredibly consistent across many of these studies is that the number one source of satisfaction for raising children is the pleasure that the parent took in watching the child grow and develop and participating in the child growing and developing. That, in the end, is what is the source of the greatest satisfaction. So I would say to you, listen to what people are saying and take that to heart, because these are the people who've actually done it, the whole process. And this is what they're telling you. If you really enjoy children and you enjoy and are interested in the process of development, that's the reason to have children, and that's the greatest satisfaction. If you don't really, then you have to sort of question whether this is the right thing for you. All right? So that's number one. The second reason is the love that the parent feels toward the child. Now, let me make it clear, not the love the child feels toward the parent. It's the love the parent feels for the child. That'd be nice if your children loved you and expressed that feeling too, but that's not the deepest satisfaction. It's the love the parent feels toward the child. You see, there's two types of love. There is being loved, and there's loving. And both of those experiences of love, to receive love and to give love, are things that in an ideal sense a human being wants and wants to experience. Unfortunately, people learn in the course of their lives and their experiences that loving another person is somewhat dangerous. The first person that you fall in love with, which you're programmed to fall in love with, as we studied in attachment theory, is probably your mother. You were this little tiny thing looking up with 10 inches of clarity and looking at this gargantuan face hovering above you, taking care of you and nurturing you, often out of her own body. You are programmed to fall in love. But unfortunately, your mother's a Homo sapien. She's not an idealism. She's not a fantasy. And she's imperfect. And she will, in some ways, hurt you and disappoint you and frustrate you. Now, that's not so bad, because in that hurt and frustration and disappointment, we develop emotional immunity and antibodies for the stresses and the attacks of the real world. So a little bit of imperfection on the part of your attachment figures is really good for you, because it makes you fight and it makes you handle frustration and to grow. If, however, the imperfections and the mistakes and the errors and the damage of the attachment figures is too great, then it overwhelms the emotional immune system and people break down and have to defend themselves. But regardless of whether or not it's a subtle hurt or a more damaging one, everybody is going to be frustrated in having an idealized love of a parent. So you grow up and you defend yourself a little bit, and you take all your childish energies into building mastery in the world, reading, writing, arithmetic, athletic, artistic, peer skills, and pouring your energy into that until you have a hormonal explosion. And then you fall in love in an idealized way with some other person. Your first romantic attachment as opposed to familial attachment. But unfortunately, you're very young and you're very naive, and probably the first person who you fall in love with, if you look back at it, you go, what was I thinking? How could I possibly have fallen in love with that person? Okay? And that's normal. But because it's probably not the right person or some kind of maniac that you fell in love with, you're going to get it again. A little bit of frustration from your first love object, your mom, later your dad. And then your second go around, your hormonally induced, idealized love in adolescence sometime. So now you're a two-time loser, okay? You've searched for idealized love and you've gotten frustration and all kinds of pain. So then you another layer of guardedness and inhibition occurs. And you might be a little bit more cautious this time. And you might even say, you know what, forget about this like complete, absolute love of the other. I'm going to focus on being loved instead of loving, because that's a lot safer. Let the other person be a mess, okay? Maybe even maybe even another defense is to get a golden retriever, because it's the only thing in the universe that you can unconditionally trust their love and affection, a golden retriever. But if you're going to still focus on Homo sapiens, a lot of times people will focus on the other type of love, which is being loved instead of loving. All right, so this is going on, and all of a sudden you have a child. And what happens is this child blows the doors off of any of these inhibitions and reconnects the adult with an unrestrained capacity for love, which, even though people got protective, this is something that they want. And that is such a valuable feeling, such a blessing for the adult to feel that level of love for something that in the end, when they look back, that is one of the great privileges. That's not to say you always like your children, but that level of love is very gratifying for many, many adults. So those are the top two. Those are always the top two. It's not like the music charts, which change every week. Those are the ones. You can put that in the bank. The pleasure of watching a child develop and participating in that develop, the interest in development. If you don't like this course, this is a pilot test for you. If you're not interested in this, you're doing this for 4 units, but you're not interested in the process of development, this should be a sign, okay? And the other one is just this deep love that you have for the kids. Some people have the child and they think that it's all going to be about the child, loving them. They have this image of holding this child, in their arms and looking up, and the child looking up to them and loving them, and that happens to a degree, but it's a lot more giving, folks, than it is taking. Okay, it's never an equal relationship. Maybe, if you do a really good job, the child will pay you back and be the one to give and give and give when you're old and infirm, like in our 4th panel. But for most of life, it's going to be more giving than it is taking, other than taking satisfaction from the process and the love you feel. Now notice on my list that I did not say it improves the marriage, or like, here are some things. Shared marital project, only 24% people said that. More things to talk about with my spouse, 15%, unless you want to talk about whether the baby took a poop that day or something like that. Pleasure for my parents, feeling closer to my spouse, self-fulfillment, having fun. These are not that high, certainly not compared to the first two. So I'm trying to let you know people's experience so you're more realistic about this. All right, so these are the benefits. Now, what are the objective costs or drawbacks to having children? Let's look at the marriage for a second and examine the question of, does having a child or children improve marital satisfaction? All right. Now, if you ask a lot of people, they'll say, "Oh yeah, no, it's going to be really good. It's going to improve, the marriage." And it's not so simple. I mean, children do not necessarily make a marriage happier. They might at certain times, but not across the board. What they do is they make a marriage deeper and they make a marriage permanent. Because even in a world where half of marriages end in divorce, approximately, at least in our culture, a little less than 50%, when you have children, that marriage is permanent. You are existentially tied through that child for the rest of your life, whether or not the state of California gives you a divorce decree or not. You can dissolve a marriage legally. You cannot dissolve a marriage existentially if you have children. That's for life. Okay? So legally, it's not necessarily death do you part. Existentially with children, it's still death do you part. All right? Now, what about the satisfaction part? Well, here again, there have been many, many studies of marital satisfaction over time. And what we find, if you had a graph, okay, so let's say the vertical side of the graph is marital satisfaction. And they have a number of empirical measures. One's called, you don't need to know this, but the dyadic satisfaction, the dyadic adjustment scale, the marital satisfaction inventory. They have really good measures, okay? So on that vertical axis is going to be your score on some reliable, valid, empirical measure of satisfaction, okay? And the horizontal axis below will be time, okay? Which will start at the very beginning of your relationship and go till one spouse dies. These charts are not for divorce. These charts are for the marriages that make it till the end, because a marriage ends in two ways. One, you get divorced or somebody dies. So the chart that I'm telling you about, this cumulative graph of these satisfaction measures are for those marriages that last over to the end. Okay, so on that graph, what we see is a kind of U-shaped, a kind of a modified U. So the satisfaction is the highest. This is important to know, is the very highest at the beginning of the relationship. This is called the honeymoon effect. It's very important to understand that over the course of thousands and thousands and thousands of marriages that people have looked at, the cumulative graph says that marital satisfaction, even in good marriages, even in marriages that make it to the end, good or bad, it's the highest at the beginning, and we call that the honeymoon effect. Now, from that very high place, it goes down very slowly at the beginning. You know, maybe the novelty wears off a little bit. You have some newly discovered annoyances that you didn't know about. So it goes down a little bit. And then at a certain point, put on your seatbelt, it drops off the cliff. What do you think happened at that point? Well, it's the birth of the first child, because that event oftentimes leads to a drop in marital satisfaction. Why? Well, think about it. When you have a baby, you lose time for the marriage to be the focus. In fact, all the things that you did to want to marry this person are reduced. You don't have time to just hang out as a couple, enjoy each other, have a uninterrupted conversation, have a dinner together, go out, have sex with each other, all the things that made you want to be with the person are severely curtailed when you have a baby. So it takes some of the good things, reduces some of the good things in the marriage. And not only that, but it reduces time for individual development. You rarely have time for yourself. You're either taking care of the baby or maybe working or coming back and spending time with the family. But you're not going to have a lot of time for yourself. You're not going to have time to go and hang out with friends. Your So time and all these things are diminished, and at the same time that you have less time to do things and enjoy things, you have more stress and demands because you have to balance the baby's needs and your work or your education and your spouse and your family and your extended family. And it's like you just are constantly, under demands. And you also have to fit in doing all the chores of life and shopping and cleaning and all these kinds of things. Everything, what we call work-life balance, just shoots up in its demand and complexity. And you're doing all of this under conditions of fatigue and exhaustion, because raising a baby in the first year or so is a physical torture test. You're not sleeping, you're carrying them around, you're caring for them all the time. They don't walk, they don't have independence, and it is really, really tiring. Okay? Most parents of infants can sleep standing up if you let them. Okay? They're like a flamingo. They could sleep standing up. All right, so that's that's why the satisfaction drops off the cliff. But then it stays kind of low and then it starts to climb up, okay? Progressively climbing up. And that is, as a child gets older and more independent, and especially when they're in school full time. So now you have a little time to yourself, a little time to work, a little time to exercise, a little time to think, a little time to talk on the phone for more than 3 sentences. You could do a lot of different things, and the child's more independent. And as they become more independent, in general, it is a good thing for the marriage. And as it's climbing up, there's one other time it takes another bump up in satisfaction. You know when that is? That's when the last child leaves home. We call that the empty nest effect. A lot of people have heard about empty nests and think it's all a bad thing. And sometimes it's sad when the last child leaves home. Maybe your mom and dad, cried a little bit when they dropped you off at college. So there is a sadness to it. A house is never as quiet as when someone leaves. But at the same time, it brings the couple back together. They become the center of things. And if there's anything left in the couple, sometimes they've been hanging on and they don't even know who they are anymore with each other. But in many instances, if they've been able to weather the storm of all this, they come back together in the empty nest, just them. And they may not be as young anymore and as vibrant anymore, but a deep, loving companionship, can occur in the best cases. And there's a bump in satisfaction. It never quite gets to the honeymoon effect, even in the best case. but it does go woof, climbing up a bump and then there. All right? So that's the first cost and struggle and difficulty. It challenges a marriage. That little baby seems very small, but that little baby is a powerful, powerful force. And whatever fault lines there are in you as an individual, and whatever fault lines there are in your spouse as an individual, that little baby is going to find it. So my recommendation to you will be that before you have a child, work on yourself. Figure out what your issues are and try to be a more solid person. And when you're solid as an individual, meet someone who's also done the work and get together and spend some time just as a couple, working things out as a couple. Two solid, mature individuals who are going to fine tune and get their relationship in a good place. So now you've gone level 1, you worked on yourself. Level 2, you've worked on the relationship and everything's solid. That's when you add a baby to the system. Unfortunately, there are people who have not done their work, who really have a lot of issues internally that they haven't faced. They get together with somebody who also has issues. They haven't worked things out in the relationship. And then they take this baby and put it on a system, an individual and a couple system, all with fault lines running through it. And that baby is going to find those fault lines and crack the system. So take your time, work on yourself, work on your couple, be solid, and then have a baby. Remember I said plan a pregnancy? Oh, I'm saying it again. All right. Last thing, issue in terms of the stresses of having a child is economic. Children cost a lot of money. And a lot of times young couples don't fully stare this reality in the face. They think like, oh, I want a baby. They're so cute and their skin's so soft and they smell so good. And I just want to love the baby and have a family. And I just really want that. Fine, great. But the fact is, it's not just an emotional decision. It's an economic decision. Accountants, as a rule of thumb, will say that a child will cost 20% of the gross income of a family. Now, this is just a, general guideline. In more expensive communities, like West LA, like where LMU is, it can be even more. But let's just look at the median family. Let's say 2 parents and 1 kid. Now, the median income in the United States, pre-coronavirus, pre-pandemic, but hopefully we'll get back to that, at some point there'll be a vaccine and we'll resume our lives. In 2019, the median income, that is the income that half of the people have more of it and half of the people have less, is $60,000 approximately. Okay? And so let's say you have a mom and a dad, or it could be a same-sex marriage, two males, two females, but two parents, okay? And each one of them has the median income. Now, it could be that one parent makes more than the other, but let's say you put together two median incomes. So it's $120,000, all right? Now, if you take 20% of that $120,000, you're looking at 1/5, so that'll be $20,000 a year, all right? So multiply that by 18, that would be $360,000, largely after taxes. Because you can't write off, you get a child credit, but this is after child credit, after all these deductions. This is the money that you have to pay net of taxes. All right, so you're looking at $20,000. So that's $360,000. And that's not including sending them to college or helping them with a down payment. If you're going to do that, if you're going to contribute or pay for some of college, if you're going to try and help them get a toehold in the world, it could be more. And that's for one child. Now, a second child's a little bit cheaper because you could double them up in a single room. You can hand me down some clothes or bicycles and things like that. But, it's still a lot of money. So it can cost, $2/3 to $1 million to raise a couple of kids without college. So you might say a baby smells really good, but so does $1 million. Go sniff $1 million, see how that smells. So anyway, that's a burden, and that's a cost. Now, I'm just being honest with you here, and some people think when I'm being honest about this that I'm kind of trying to dissuade you from having children or talking negatively about children. No, I'm not. I mean, I know all the reality of it, both from an academic point of view and having done it myself, raised two children, into adulthood. And it's what I'm just trying to say to you, as I said at the beginning, it's not all fun and all pleasure and all satisfaction. And it's hard. And be realistic about it. But if you ask me, I would, even knowing everything that I know now, I would still do it again. Because to me, the ultimate thing is that, to me, and this is not everybody, I think I have one life. I'm interested in life. And I think having children is an area of life that I wanted to experience. And I don't think it's always made me as happy and enjoying everything, but I think it's taught me about life and had me experience life in ways I never would have, and that's very valuable to me as a psychologist and a writer. These are things that I value. So, yeah, I mean, Norman Mailer, the great American novelist, once said about living in a family with children that all great issues of life may just as well originate here. Like everything is really there. And there's so much to learn if you go into it deeply. And that doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean it's all fun, and it certainly is not all games, but it is deeply meaningful. And as a psychologist, teaching developmental psychology, working with clients in my clinical practice, doing my writing, all these things I feel are have deeply enriched my career. And I don't think that I would be able to teach or work with people or express things if I didn't learn many of the things that I learned through my own children. I would say that they've been my best teachers. Piaget, who we emphasized, also had two daughters, and he learned about the mind and about the development of the mind by basically following his children around and writing down everything he observed and thought about. He basically stalked his children to fame. So that's why I would do it. But a lot of people will just sell you a bunch of nonsense about how it's all homogeneously good, and it's all idealized. And it's not. Because I teach developmental psychology, I get a lot of emails from former students who, I told you in the beginning of the class, this is a story of your own life, of your parents' lives, of the people that you love lives. This is real life. This is not just some academic discipline. It's an academic discipline, but it's also a prelude to exactly what is going to happen in your life. And so this is something that you can learn about and think about, in advance. So what else? So here's what I would do. I'm always talking about these engaged learning things. Let's actually do an engaged learning experiment. And here I'm going off of, I won't mention her name because I don't want to embarrass her, but there's a student in our class, she knows who I'm talking about now, who has been watching some of the lectures that I've been posting online while she's in lockdown, along with all of us, with her dad and maybe her mom as well. And the lectures, because they involve things in life, have prompted some interesting conversations. And it prompted me to remember something that I always wanted to do, which is I always had this fantasy of like having a class at LMU with the students, and on an optional basis, maybe having the class more later in the day, like 4:30 or even 7 o'clock, so the parents might be available, and having each student have one of their parents come to the class with them and go through the stages of life with studying it and talking about it with their parents. Now, the parents wouldn't have to take the exams or quizzes, so that may not be fair, but too bad, they're paying for it, so they don't have to take the quizzes and the exams, okay? But they would be in there. Could you imagine, going about it, talking about your early temperament and about, labor and delivery and about, adolescence and all these issues, and having the parents in the class and them reading the same things and being in the same class? It would be so interesting to do. And I think we'd have phenomenal conversations, and it might achieve my objective, which is to get you, all the students in the class, to get down on your hands and knees and beg your parents for forgiveness, okay, for what they've done. Anyway, I think it'll be fascinating. So anyway, when the student told me that she was watching the lectures with, one or both of her parents, it reminded me of that sort of fantasy that I had, and be really interesting to do that at LMU. But anyway, this is all a precursor to this engaged learning assignment, that if your parents are around with you in lockdown, what I'd like you to do, is not going to be on any exam or whatever. So if that's all you think about, don't worry about it. Okay. But to sit down with your mom and dad or both of them and make a budget for a family of four. Okay. So let's say, I'll even give you some parameters. A kid who's 12 years old, so that means in seventh grade, and another one who is 16 years old, in 11th grade, and about to as about starting to have car lust and also thinking about college. And then sit down and have them help you make a budget for this family. And this budget, I'm looking at some items I put down. Housing costs. If you have a mortgage, principal, interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance and repair, gardening, utilities, food, childcare. It's not childcare because they'd be too old, but education costs, activities costs, gifts and birthdays of all your friends that they have to, buy things for, health insurance, life insurance, clothing, going out, entertainment, vacations, camps, saving for college, saving for their own retirement. These are just some of the things that I thought about. They'll probably, be able to add some cars, everything about cars, leasing a car. How many cars would you need for four people? So all these things, and work with them and come up with a budget and see what it costs to have a comfortable life, stable life in today's society with a family of four. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is that people are clever and they've found certain ways that they could form a compromise where they can get all their needs met. All their needs meaning that they can have a child or children and derive the satisfaction and the learning that they may get from that powerful experience. So they would have a child or children, but at the same time to try and minimize the pressures on the marriage and on their personal development and on their financial pressure. So we have the benefits of having the children, which we want to maintain. And is there a way to minimize the costs while trying to get the benefits? This is what we call a compromise solution in life. Get the things you want, get the benefits, and minimize the drawbacks. So how do you do that? Well, one of the ways that people consciously or unconsciously are doing this is that they are having children later. They're delaying having children. What this does is that it gives them more time for personal development and growth, get all their running around, all their going out and all the things that you're going to be hunkered down for a while and have to give up. Go and have a lot of individual experiences, grow as an individual and become solid individually, and then find the right person, work through what you need to work through. So you have a really solid marriage. And spend time with each other and go do things and travel and go to restaurants and spend time with friends and each other so that at a certain point you feel ready. You won't feel resentful by not going out. You won't feel resentful by staying home. You won't feel resentful by not going to the restaurant. You won't be resentful as much for not having individual time. As one woman said to me, She said, you reach a point where you can only go out to so many clubs and so many restaurants, and you're ready for something different, and you don't resent it. So, so delayed parenthood is one solution. And then the second one is that people are having smaller families. In the 1950s, 60s, a little more than half a century ago, people were having routinely 3, 4 children. And now the median number of children would be about 1.7. So a lot of people are having one child, a lot of people are having 2 children, but really even a family of 3 these days, or certainly more, is getting more unusual rather than typical. So by delaying parenthood and having smaller families, let me just say one more thing about the delayed parenthood. As we're getting as we're living longer lives, and many of us are having better health practices that we talked about in the childhood obesity stuff, learning about proper health practices. And now in the last panel, we're going to talk about longer lives. If you could live longer and stay healthier, you can enter the child rearing years instead of in your 20s. You can enter easily in the 30s and still have, raise your kids for 25 years and still be in your 50s and have, like 30, 40 years before you pass away. So because of a longer life, and if you take care of your health, there's no reason that you couldn't have children somewhat later, have more time yourself, more time to the couple, and also have a smaller family. And this is a solution that many, many people are employing, either consciously or unconsciously, to both have children, but minimize some of the costs and pressures of doing so. All right, let's end here. I'll post this video later tonight, and I'll post the slides either tonight or tomorrow. And then next week, I'll be back to talk about our next unit, our next stage on middle adulthood. Okay, see you guys. Bye-bye.